Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is Kid Nate of BloodyElbow.com, and I have the honor of being joined by Big John McCarthy, the first ever referee, or actually the second referee in UFC history, but the longest tenured referee in the sports history, and the man who created the unified rules. And he's here to talk about the Big John's MMA Fight Club, this new mobile app. So tell me about the Big John MMA Fight Club.
The app is made really so fans can have fun, just more fun with the sport. You get all the time where you have people talking about, who they think is going to win a fight and why and how and all these different things. And then they'll sit there and, go with friends and then go back and say, I told you so and stuff like that. So we came up with an app that they could actually, it's gambling but with no money. It's virtual money, so it doesn't count against anything. It's not going to hurt anyone's pocketbook. But you can collect coins by betting against your friends as far as who you think is going to win a fight, how you think the fight's going to end, and in what round you think it's going to end. All those things will, get you more coins as far as things, and those coins can lead you to actually getting prizes and things like that you can buy off of the site. So it's really about just enjoying yourself with your friends and watching the sport of MMA. I'll have a guest host that's going to be on that's going to give their opinion on who they believe is going to win the fight and how and what round. And you can also bet against them to see if you can match up with the pro to see if your opinion is as good as theirs.
And so what machines will this work on? Your iPhones, and is it also going to be available on Android?
Yeah, it'll be available on the Apples and on the Androids also.
Cool. And what events will people be able to make picks from? Just the UFC or other events as well?
No, we're going to do other events also. Obviously the UFC is going to be is the big one, and we're going to do that. But we're going to be doing shows. We'll be doing Bellator. We'll be doing Invicta. We're going to be doing any show. We'll be doing World Series of Fighting. Any show that's PXC from the Philippines. All of them.
Are you going to be doing ONE FC and Legend?
Absolutely. There'll be times where we'll be doing ONE FC, Legends, different ones. It's not going to be all the fights that are on there, but we'll, especially with some of them, if they have a championship fight, or they have a main fight that's interesting, we'll absolutely be putting that on there.
All right, and so how can fans get a hold of the Big John's Fight Club app?
They can go to the website, and it's Big John's MMA Fight Club. They can go to that to pick it up and to see what it's like. It's going to be coming out November 12th, so it's only a couple days away from them being able to get it. So it should be something that they're going to have a lot of fun with. That's the whole purpose of it, is to have fun.
Cool. Well, looking forward to it. I can't wait to download my copy. And while I've got you, I wanted to ask you a couple questions about a little bit of MMA history. Everybody at Bloody Elbow knows that I'm a big MMA history geek. UFC 6 was the first one I saw live on pay-per-view, and UFC 17 was the first one I ever got a chance to see live in Kennard, Louisiana. So I just wanted to ask you, we're familiar with the story of how you were a student of Rorion Gracie, one of the founders of the UFC, and had some concerns about the safety of the first couple of UFCs, or the first UFC, where the referee had very limited ability to control what was going on in the fight, and also perhaps his judgment and experience weren't the most ideal. So you were in there from UFC 2 on all the way. So we're recording again. All right, Big John, changed locations for 2 locations, very short interview. It's like twice as valuable. So you were the referee of the UFC during what they call the Dark Ages. That's when Senator John McCain was pillaring the UFC as human cockfighting, some of which the UFC brought on itself with a pretty tasteless marketing campaign. What were your thoughts when that counter reactions first started up? Did you think the sport was doomed, or did you think it was going to be a big deal, or did you know you were in trouble, or did you think it was going to blow over?
No, it was, when things really started to get, the sport was, really, the UFC was starting to really boom from, UFC 4 to 5 to 6 to 7. The numbers of people that were showing up and that were interested in it was really just accelerating at a huge pace. But at UFC 8, when we went to Puerto Rico, is when the whole thing really started to come about with problems. And, McCain had gone, and he had sent letters out to all the different governors, and he obviously sent one out to Puerto Rico because that's where we were going, and they tried to stop it. We ended up in federal court going and having an actual case on them trying to get an injunction to stop it, and us trying to get something to stop them from being able to do it. And in the end, we won the case, but at the time, Bob Meyerowitz was the owner of it, and he was celebrating when we won, and we were in the lawyer's office, where we had received the judgment from the federal court, and he was very excited, and I stopped him in his excitement. I said, Bob, hey, I don't mean to be, the person that's going to try to put a little damper on this. I said, but you need to think about this, because this isn't going to stop. This is going to continue on. I said, we didn't win anything here. Yes, we won the right to put the show on, but all we won is the ability to get back to status quo. We didn't gain anything. And in the next town, they can do the same thing, and there's always going to be that chance that you can lose. And so, I realized pretty quickly, being, my background in law enforcement and knowing how courts work and, being around them, I thought that there was some problems there, and that we needed to start to get smart in what we were going to do to try to combat what they were coming after us with.
And that's when the evolution of MMA rules began. Was that was directly as a response to the troubles that were coming in, right? Or was it something that you think would have organically happened anyway?
I think it would have. Things changed from show to show because of things that were happening in the fights. Excuse me, but it was the entire event and everything that happened. And really, when McCain was able to get to Time Warner, and Leo Henry was in charge of that, and he got to him by making a deal with him to get the UFC off of pay-per-view. Basically at the time, pay-per-view numbers as far as what was available to homes in the United States is the UFC was available to about 40 million homes in the United States, and that was cut down to about 5 after that entire incident. So that took a huge cut in what people were able to, even if they wanted to get the UFC, they weren't able to get it. So that was the time that we really started to look at changing, the entire rule set. And that's when I sat down and I wrote up a list of 18 rules that we brought to Leo Henry to try to get him to understand that this was a real sport, because he was saying that there was no sport that would allow the things that we allowed at the time. And I can understand that, looking back at it, he wasn't really wrong. So that's when the real changes started to make, and we put those rule sets in between UFC 14 and UFC 15.
And when did you work with the late Jeff Blotnick and Nick Limbo on the first? New Jersey was the first state to sanction the unified rules, and so am I correct to say you worked with Blotnick and Limbo on the first official development of the unified rule set for the New Jersey Commission?
Well, Jeff Blotnick had a lot more to do with throughout time when we started doing things at between UFC 21 and 22. Jeff was placed in what was called the Mixed Martial Arts Council. He was put in charge of that, and we started to adapt an entire rule set and change criteria for judging. And Jeff and I did that together, and he had a huge part in it. New Jersey, when you sit there, New Jersey wasn't the first state to sanction MMA. Mississippi was the first state to sanction the UFC. That was at UFC 15. But then as things went on, at UFC 28 was the first time the UFC was in New Jersey. And New Jersey had 2 shows up to that point. They had the IFC, Paul Smith show, the IFC, which was done at the Tropicana Hotel, and then they had the UFC. And they looked at it and said, we can't have different shows coming in with different rule sets. We want to establish that, and Larry Hazard was the one that brought together all of these different promoters into a room to sit down and try to hash out what everyone could get along with as far as the rules. And Nick Limbo had a big part in that, since he was the general counsel for New Jersey at the time. So Nick was the one that ended up actually writing those out after we all discussed them and said, okay, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do this, this is going to be a foul. And then Nick was the one that actually drafted that onto paper, so he had a huge part in that.
So let's go back to the Mississippi Commission, because I had completely blanked that did they have a boxing commission, or did the state just sanction MMA in a sort of loose way, or did they have a written rule set and a boxing commission and the whole bit, or was it? Because I can't even think of a time when the Mississippi Athletic Commission has come up across my radar in the last 6 years of writing about MMA.
It went away again.
Can you hear me? I can still see you and hear you.
Well, yeah, now I can. You broke up there for a second, but
Okay, sorry. I never lost you, so I was just asking about the Mississippi Commission. So would you say it was a full-blown commission comparable to what New Jersey did, or was it more of kind of an ad hoc deal when they sanctioned the UFC in
well,
Mississippi?
no, when you look at an athletic commission, they're obviously all going to be of different sizes and levels as far as the amount of shows they do. But Mississippi was an actual, it's the same as any athletic commission. California is probably the biggest athletic commission there is because they put on by far the most shows. You can look at Nevada as being one of the most influential athletic commissions. New Jersey is very, influential, especially in the East and stuff. New York has got an athletic commission, but they don't do MMA. So at the time, Mississippi was a smaller athletic commission as you're looking at, but they're every bit the athletic commission as far as what they regulate. They do the same regulation on a boxing show or an MMA show that any other athletic commission is going to do. At the time, Billy Lyon, he's an older gentleman and he was a bit of a rebel, and he had gotten the letter from his governor saying that McCain had suggested that they don't do this, and he was not going to do it. And then we went down and talked to him and explained it to him, and he was like, you know what? Yeah, that's fighting, and I can sanction that. And he was the first one to actually do it. New Jersey was the one that ended up bringing everyone together to put together what we now call the unified rules.
I see. Well, very informative. Are there any rules in there that you kind of wish hadn't changed, like anything like 12 to 6 elbows or knees to a downed opponent, anything that you felt the sport lost a little something when they imposed the rules, or are you pretty happy with the rule set that we ended up with the unified rules?
People ask me that all the time, and I get myself in trouble, but people don't really remember what some of the older rules were, and there was things that were put into the unified rules that were not part of what we were doing before, and there was things that were taken out and allowed that we weren't allowing. So, at the time, you could not kick an opponent who was on the ground. You couldn't kick him to the body. You couldn't kick him to the head. If a guy was down, you could jump in with a punch, but you could not kick them in any fashion. But they could kick at you if you were the one standing. Well, New Jersey, when we went there and did the unified rules, that changed where you were allowed to kick to the body of a person on the ground. You just couldn't kick him to the head. So that was something that was actually added that we weren't allowed to do before. When you look at, the elbow rule and things like that, it's, I don't look at it as being that effective a rule in the protection and safety of a fighter. That elbow is, in my opinion, no more, dangerous in any fashion than any elbow that is thrown, especially, a Muay Thai elbow that's thrown across that has power. That's going to have a lot more power than that 12 to 6 elbow. What they're really looking at doing was they had watched a fight. It was Gan McGee versus Brad Gabriel. That was the first show that was done in Jersey, and a doctor had seen, Gan throwing these elbows to the back of someone's neck and head, and he didn't want that, and so that was really what led to that rule. But that the back of the head is covered by a rule itself, so that should have taken care of it. But it's just part of the rules. There's ones in there that have nothing to do with really protecting the fighter that they could get rid of. But at this point, I don't think you're going to see those rules really changing because they've been very successful. The shows have been successful, and the fighter safety has been absolutely at a very high level. For a combative sport, we don't have major injuries, taking place, thank God. So the rules have really worked. And so do I see people allowing someone to do knee strikes to the head of a fighter on the ground? I don't see it happen.
Very good. Well, I'm running out of my time allotment. Thank you very much for joining me. One last question. When can fans look forward to seeing you in the cage again? You going to be reffing any fights anytime soon?
Oh, my God. I'm reffing fights every week, everywhere. I just got back from Abu Dhabi. I'm in Hawaii. I go from here to the Philippines to do PXC, and then I go down to Brazil to do Rickson Gracie's show. I am working every week somewhere.
Awesome. I look forward to seeing you. Thanks very much for your time. And remember, that's the Big John MMA Fight Club. You can get it on your iPhone. And what's the date again? November
12th.
November 12th. And so that's when I'll do the post. And thanks very much for joining me, Big John. It's an honor to talk to you, and hope we get to do it again sometime.
Great talking to you. You take care, Nate.
Thanks, John.